The cleaner rectangle on the cream wool living room rug had been the first thing Catherine Brennan saw every morning for 9 months, and it was the first thing she saw on the morning of Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, when she came downstairs barefoot in her dressing gown to put the kettle on. 9 months earlier, in June 2025, 2 men from the Bangor Piano Exchange had carried out of that corner of the room the dark walnut story, and Clark Upright David had bought her for their 20th wedding anniversary in 1998, and the rug under the rectangle had been so faithfully sheltered from sun and from foot traffic for 27 years that the wool inside the rectangle was still the color of fresh cream, while the wool around the rectangle was the color of old butter. Kate had told herself, the day the piano left, that she would move a small table or a reading chair into the space within a week, so that she would not have to look at the rectangle. She had not moved anything. The rectangle had stayed. She put the kettle on the gas. She stood at the window over the kitchen sink. The lights of Pine Grove, Maine were still on at 5:15 in the morning, the way the lights of Pine Grove, Maine were on at 5:15 every morning in March, because the men at the IGA started receiving deliveries at 4:30, and Mary Cobb at the bakery started the bread at 4. The kitchen radio that David had bought in 1991 was tuned, as it had been tuned since 2002, to WERU out of East Orland. Public radio out of the Penobscot Bay. The volume was very low. A pre-dawn announcer was reading the marine forecast for down east. Gale warning for Frenchman Bay. Visibility 2 miles. Kate listened to the marine forecast the way some women listened to morning prayer, because it had been the first thing she had ever heard her husband listen to at 5 in the morning when she had moved into his apartment in Bangor in 1979, when she was 21 and a piano performance senior at the conservatory, and he was a 25-year-old mill foreman with calloused thumbs and a slow, gentle laugh. The kettle whistled. Kate poured the boiling water over a single bag of Twining's English breakfast tea into the chipped bicentennial mug her older sister Patty had given her in 1976, the one with the cracked rim that Kate had carried out of her own mother's kitchen in 1979, and that she had not been parted from since. She added a single splash of cold milk from the carton in the door of the refrigerator. She carried the mug into the living room. She set the mug on the small side table next to the small needlepoint footstool that had belonged to her mother, in the corner of the room nearest the empty rectangle on the rug. She lowered herself onto the footstool. She picked up the small framed black and white photograph that had stood on the side table beside the mug for 2 years and 2 months and 1 week, and she held the photograph in both her hands the way she had held it every morning of those 2 years and 2 months and 1 week, and she looked at it. The boy in the photograph was Joseph Brennan, 7 years old. The date written in pencil on the cardboard backing was October 31st, 1998. The boy in the photograph wore a clip-on bow tie and a navy blazer 2 sizes too big, and he sat on a black 1923 Steinway model 45 upright piano bench in front of the in-store demonstration piano at Halliburton's Music on Main Street, Pine Grove, and he was looking up at his mother, who was the one holding the camera, with his mouth pressed shut in concentration and his small left hand frozen on the keys at the C minor chord he had just been told, very firmly, by old Mr. Thomas Halliburton, was the correct fingering for the third measure of an arrangement of long, long ago that an absolute beginner could learn in 9 weeks. The recital had been Joe's first. He had played the entire arrangement without a wrong note. He had played it. The woman holding the camera that day had thought with a touch she had not heard in any 7-year-old she had ever taught, and she had taught 7-year-olds for 18 years already by the time of the photograph, and she had taught them for another 25 afterward, and she had never heard the touch in another 7-year-old since. Joseph Brennan had grown up. He had gone to the New England Conservatory in Boston on a Charles Ives scholarship at 18. He had taken his master's in composition at 24. He had married a nurse named Marcy Lindgren in a small ceremony at the Pine Grove Methodist Church in 2020. He had become a father in 2022 of a girl named Lily Joan Brennan, who had been the only grandchild Kate would ever have. He had been driving home to Boston after a Sunday supper at his mother's house in Pine Grove on the morning of February 4th, 2024, when his small silver Subaru Outback had hit black ice on Route 9 near Eddington, Maine, and had spun once across the center line and into the granite shoulder. He had been 32 years old. He had died in the ambulance before they reached the hospital in Bangor. Kate had not been in the car. Marcy and Lily had not been in the car. Joe had been alone. Kate set the framed photograph back on the side table. She drank her tea. She did not cry. She had cried, in the way she could cry, sometime in the first 6 weeks of 2024, and she had not been able to cry the same way since, because the way had gone out of her. She had a different way of crying since then, which was a way that did not produce tears, only a kind of slow internal tilting of everything inside her ribcage toward the floor. She finished the tea. She rinsed the mug at the kitchen sink. She set the mug upside down on the wooden rack. She went upstairs. She dressed in the slow, careful schoolteacher way she had dressed every morning of her life since 1965, when her mother had stopped laying out her clothes the night before because Kate had insisted on choosing them herself at the age of 7. She wore the soft, oatmeal cashmere turtleneck Patty had sent up from Portland for her 65th birthday, and the dark, plum-wool, wide-leg trousers she had bought herself for her own retirement from teaching in 2023, and her ox-blood leather lace-up ankle boots, and the small pearl stud earrings David had given her on their first wedding anniversary in 1980. She put her hair up in a low, loose twist, then took it back down because Joe had liked it down, and she let it fall in soft, auburn-gray waves to her shoulders. She put on the simple, worn gold wedding band on her left hand. She tucked her thin black leather pocket notebook under her left arm because she had carried a black leather pocket notebook under her left arm every day of her teaching life, and she did not have a way of being out in the world without one yet. She put on the long, cinnamon-brown, corduroy duster coat she had been wearing every March for 7 Marches now. She put on her wool knit beanie. She let herself out of the small clapboard salt box at 14 Oak Hill Road, and she walked, slowly, into the village. The walk from Oak Hill Road into the village of Pine Grove was 3/4 of a mile through the bare, leafless sugar maple woods her father-in-law had bought her and David in 1980 with the down payment from his own retirement. The road descended gently. The eastern sky over the ridge at the back of the village was the color of weak tea by the time Kate reached the granite war memorial at the corner of Maple Street in Maine, the same memorial that bore her father-in-law's older brother's name. Killed in action, Normandy, June 1944. She touched the bronze letters of the name with the tip of her gloved finger because she had been touching them since she had moved to Pine Grove in 1979. She turned on to Maine. Main Street in Pine Grove was 9 storefronts long. Cobb's Bakery on the south end, lit and warm. The IGA Grocery, lit and busy. The Pine Grove Post Office, dark until 7. The hardware store, dark. The Pine Grove Methodist Church and the AA Hall in its basement at the north end, dark until evening. The closed library at the corner of Main and Elm, dark since 2018. The boarded-up storefront that had been the Penobscot Bank branch, dark since 2019. The boarded-up storefront that had been Halliburton's Music, at 18 Pine Grove Main Street, half a block south of the church, dark since 2010. Kate had walked this same length of Main Street in the same direction, on the same shoulder of the same sidewalk, 3 mornings a week since 2008. She had walked it during her own first year sober. She had walked it during David's slow recovery in 2008 and 2009. She had walked it during the long, peaceful years of his last decade. She had walked it during the spring after his death in 2018. She had walked it during the first terrible year after Joe died in 2024. She had walked past 18 Pine Grove Main Street more than 1,000 times. She had not, in the 16 years since Halliburton's had closed, ever lifted her eyes to look at the front of the building, because Joe had taken his first lesson there in October 1998, and his last lesson there in May 2007, and the building had been, for her, a kind of small private cathedral she did not feel adequate to enter even from the sidewalk. She passed the bakery. Mary Cobb gave her a small, slow wave through the steamy window. Kate gave a small, slow wave back. She passed the IGA. She passed the post office. She passed the hardware store. She came, in the iron blue light of the morning of March the 10th, 2026, to the dead middle of Main Street. And she stopped, because she had seen, in the corner of her vision, before she could stop herself, a small yellow paper taped to the plywood-sheeted front window of 18 Pine Grove, Main Street. She did not, at first, turn her head. She stood on the opposite shoulder of the sidewalk for almost a full minute, with her gloved hands deep in the pockets of the corduroy coat, and her eyes on the cobblestones at her feet, and her breath very slow, and her heart in her throat. Then she crossed the street at the unlit crosswalk by the War Memorial. She walked the half-block back along the boarded side. She walked up to the front step of Halliburton's Music. She lifted her eyes for the first time in 16 years. The neon sign above the storefront door, Music, was dead. The gold-leaf cursive lettering, Halliburton's Music, which Thomas Halliburton's father had painted himself in 1962, was faded down to a pale ghost on the brick above the doorway, the way old gold leaf went when nobody had taken a wet rag to it in 15 years. The front display window was sheeted with plywood that had gone gray with 16 winters. Between the plywood and the door frame, in the small remaining strip of clear glass at the top right, a yellow Paper County auction notice had been taped to the inside of the glass. She read the notice. Penobscot County, Commonwealth of Maine. Public auction of real property. Premises known as 18 Pine Grove, Main Street, commonly described as Halliburton's Music. Foreclosure for non-payment of municipal property tax, 2014 through 2025. Inclusive. Assessed value, $61,200. Back taxes owed, $3,216.50. Reserve price for public bid, $1. Bid date, Wednesday, March 11th, 2026, 10 a.m. Penobscot County Courthouse, Bangor. Winning bidder assumes title, contents, and the entirety of back tax settlement within 5 business days of award. Contact Clerk Ansel Poulain, Extension 2. The bid was the next morning. The reserve was $1. The contents were included. Kate put one gloved hand flat against the cold plywood. She closed her eyes for a moment. Joe had taken his first lesson on the Steinway upright at the back of this building. He had played, on that same Steinway, the entirety of his New England Conservatory audition program on a Saturday afternoon in February 2009 when he was 17, with old Mr. Halliburton standing in the doorway between the showroom and the back room with both his hands clasped together at his mouth and tears in his eyes. He had played Bach, Schubert, Bartók, and a single late-period Brahms intermezzo. He had been admitted to the conservatory with the Ives Scholarship 4 months later. He had told Kate, on the drive home that February afternoon in 2009, "You should hear how that piano sings, Mom. It's an old, old soul." The piano. The 1923 Steinway. The piano was still inside the building, Kate realized, standing on the front step of the boarded music store in the iron blue light of a Tuesday morning in March 2026 in Pine Grove, Maine, because no one had ever paid the 4 men in the dolly to take it out. The piano was still inside the building. The piano was, by law, the contents. The contents were included. She took her gloved hand off the plywood. She turned. She walked, faster now, back down Main Street toward home, with her notebook tucked tight under her left arm and her heart, for the first time in 2 years and 2 months and 1 week, beating like the kind of organ that still had a use. She did not, that evening, tell anyone at the AA meeting. The Pine Grove Methodist Church basement. Tuesday night chapter had been Kate's chapter for 18 years, since the October evening in 2008 when she had driven David to his first meeting and had walked, on a half-formed impulse she did not understand at the time, down the stairs behind him and into the room, and sat down in the back row and listened. She had not, at that first meeting, identified herself as anything except a wife. By her third meeting, she had identified herself as Kate, and she's an alcoholic because she had understood by then that the half-formed impulse had been the truth she had been refusing to look at for a decade. The chapter at 6:30 that Tuesday evening was 11 people. Kate took her usual folding metal chair in the back row by the radiator. The chair, the radiator, the room itself with its painted concrete floor and its institutional cream walls and its single corkboard of meeting flyers under fluorescent lights had been the constants of her life since 2008. The voice of Pastor Avery McGuire opening the meeting, the slow Maine cadence of the readings, the small clatter of the coffee urn on the side table, the same handful of people, half of them now gray-haired, almost all of them now also widowed, were the texture of her sobriety. She did not, in any of her readings or in the small open-share time at the end, mention the auction notice she had read at 6:15 that morning. She was not a woman who told the room everything. She had learned, in 18 years of Tuesdays, that the room held what you brought into it, and that sometimes what you needed to bring into it was not yet a thing you knew how to name out loud. The auction notice was not yet a thing she knew how to name out loud. The thought of the 1923 Steinway upright still standing at the back of the dark empty room behind the plywood was, however, sitting in her chest the entire 90 minutes of the meeting, the way the marine forecast for Frenchman Bay had sat in her chest sometimes when David had still been alive, and she had not yet told him that she had needed that morning to hear another human voice before 5 in the morning more than she had needed to sleep. At the end of the meeting, when the lights came up and the 11 of them stood in a loose circle and said the Serenity Prayer, Kate said the prayer in the same indoor voice she had used in front of second graders for 43 years of piano lessons in her living room. Then she helped Pastor Avery McGuire fold the chairs, because Kate had helped fold the chairs every Tuesday since 2008. And then she walked home in the cold dark, and the small flat of her own breath in the cold air felt, for the first time in 2 years, like a breath she did not have to apologize for. She called her sister Patty at 9:30 that night. Patty answered on the second ring because Patty had been a widow since 2018 and had not slept through the night since George Fahey had died in his sleep at 66. "Catherine," Patty said. "Catherine, is anyone in the hospital?" Kate said, "No, Patty." Patty said, "Then why are you calling me at 9:30 on a Tuesday in March?" Kate said, "Patty, there is an auction notice on Halliburton's music." Patty was quiet for a long time. Then Patty said, "Catherine, what kind of auction?" Kate said, "A tax foreclosure auction. Penobscot County. Reserve is $1. Back taxes are $3,200. Bid is tomorrow morning at 10 at the courthouse in Bangor. Patty, the Steinway is still inside the building. The contents are included." Patty was quiet again. Patty had always been the older sister who let Kate finish. Patty said, finally, "Catherine, what does the inside of that building look like in 2026? Is the roof sound?" Kate said, "I don't know, Patty. I haven't been inside the building since 2007. The roof was sound the last time I was inside the building." Patty said, "Will the clerk let you walk it tonight?" Kate said, "Patty, it is 23 minutes to 10 on a Tuesday in March. The courthouse is closed. The clerk is at home with his children." Patty said, "Then I will not tell you to bid on a building you have not walked. But, Catherine, if the roof is sound and the piano is inside, you bid on that building tomorrow morning. Do you hear me? You bid on it. David's life insurance will cover the back taxes, and you know it. You bid on it, and you bring that piano home." Kate said, "Patricia." Patty said, "Catherine, you bid on it. That is your son's piano. He told me." "He told me," 3 weeks before he died on the phone from Boston that he had been playing that piano every Sunday afternoon when he came up to see you. Halliburton's nephew had given him the spare key. You did not know. Joe asked me not to tell you because he was saving the surprise. Catherine, you bid on that building. You bring your son's piano home. Kate did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, in the small, steady voice of a woman who has just been told a thing about her own dead son that nobody had ever told her before. Patricia. Thank you for telling me, Patty said in a voice that was thick now. You bid, Catherine, you bid. I will drive up Friday and help you with whatever needs cleaning. Kate did not sleep that night. She lay under the blue patchwork quilt David's mother had stitched in 1972, and she stared at the dark ceiling of the bedroom, and she did the arithmetic she had done 8 times since she had walked away from the front step of 18 Pine Grove Main Street that morning. The trustee at the estate lawyer's office in Bangor, who had administered David's life insurance proceeds in 2018, was a man named Mark Levesque, who had been 5 years ahead of David at Pine Grove High School. The policy had paid out $84,000 in May 2018. Kate had spent $8,000 on David's burial and headstone and the cemetery plot beside her own mother in St. Anne's. She had spent another $6,000 on a 2014 Toyota Corolla to replace the Buick David had driven. She had put the remainder in a small certificate of deposit at Penobscot Trust at a low rate, and she had not touched it. After 8 years of small interest, the balance in the CD was just under $75,000. The CD would mature in October. She did not need the CD to live. Her own retirement savings from 43 years of teaching plus David's mill pension covered the mortgage and the groceries and the heating oil and the property tax and the gas for the Corolla, with a small margin. The CD had been, for 8 years, the only thing in her life she had not yet known what to do with. She knew now what to do with $3,217 of it. She was at the Pine Grove Trust Company at 8 o'clock the next morning. She withdrew $3,320 in cash, in 520 hundreds and 10 20s and 25s, because Mark Levesque, on the phone the night before, at home with his children, had told her, "Catherine, you will want cash. The county does not take a personal check for foreclosure back taxes within 5 business days. They will require a cashier's check, but if you have the cash on the bidding day, they will let you write the cashier's check at the courthouse window." She put the cash in an interior pocket of the corduroy coat. She drove the 18 miles east to Bangor in the small silver Toyota Corolla. She parked in the diagonal slot on Hammond Street. She walked the 3 blocks to the Penobscot County Courthouse. She climbed the gray granite steps. The clerk's office was on the 2nd floor. Ansel Poulin, the clerk, was a man of 58 in a navy cardigan over a cream cotton button-down shirt with a small round face and a thin gray mustache, and the kind of slow, gentle voice Kate had grown up associating with the Acadian villages east of Brewer. Mr. Poulin was already standing at the counter when Kate came through the door at 9:38. Because Mark Levesque had called Mr. Poulin at home the night before, too, and because Bangor was a small enough city that the trustee at one estate lawyer's office had been a college roommate of the clerk of court in 1984. "Mrs. Brennan," Mr. Poulin said, "welcome. I am very sorry about your son. I was at the service in 2024. I do not believe we spoke." Kate said, "Mr. Poulin, you spoke very kindly with Marcy in the receiving line. Thank you for being there." Mr. Poulin said, "Mrs. Brennan, will you be entering a bid on Halliburton's?" Kate said, "Yes, Mr. Poulin." Mr. Poulin said, "Sit down, please. The bid opens in 22 minutes. No other bidder has registered. No other bidder registered. No other bidder appeared at the quarter past when Mr. Poulin called the bid formally open, and no other bidder appeared at the half past when Mr. Poulin called the bid for the second time, and no other bidder appeared at the 11:15 when Mr. Poulin called the bid for the third and final time." At 11 o'clock, exactly, Mr. Poulin closed the bid window and looked at Kate over the rim of his reading glasses, and he said, "Mrs. Brennan, the bid is yours, uncontested at the reserve." He slid a single one-page form across the wooden counter. Bidder application. Foreclosure sale. Real property. Penobscot County. Me. Kate took off her gloves. She filled in her name in the neat schoolteacher cursive she had been practicing since 1965. She wrote Catherine Mary Fahey Brennan. She filled in 14 Oak Hill Road, Pine Grove, Maine, 04481 as her current address. She listed David Brennan, deceased, on the line for spouse. She signed her name on the bottom line. She dated it March 11th, 2026. She slid the form back across the wooden counter to Mr. Poulin, together with a single $1 bill from the interior pocket of her coat. The same dollar bill she had folded twice into a square at 6:20 that morning, and one cashier's check the Penobscot trust teller had cut for her at the window at 8:15, made out to Penobscot County Treasurer for $3,216.50. Mr. Poulin took the dollar in his clean, dry fingers. He stamped the form with a heavy iron stamp, received March 11th, 2026. He countersigned the cashier's check. He slid a paper receipt across to her. He said, "Mrs. Brennan, the property is yours." He paused. He said in the same slow, gentle Acadian village voice, "Welcome home, Catherine." Kate did not, for a moment, say anything. Then she said in a voice that came up from somewhere lower in her chest than she had used in 2 years, "Thank you, Mr. Poulin. Thank you." She walked out of the courthouse into the cold March morning. She sat down on the granite step for a moment because her legs were not steady. She put her receipt in the interior pocket of the corduroy coat against her breastbone, on the same side as the small framed photograph of Joe at 7 that she had not realized. Until that morning at 6:20, she had also tucked into the same interior pocket, between the receipt for the cashier's check and the lining of the coat, on the absolute final impulse before walking out the door at Oak Hill Road. She drove the 18 miles west to Pine Grove with both hands on the wheel of the Corolla. She did not turn on the radio. She did not need the radio. The morning was the quietest morning she had spent in any car in 2 years and 2 months and 1 week. And the quietness in the car was not the quietness of grief, which she knew, but a different quietness which she did not yet have a name for, and which she suspected she would be a long time learning. She parked the Toyota in the diagonal slot on Pine Grove Main Street directly in front of 18 Pine Grove Main Street. She got out. She walked up the front step. She put the brass key Mr. Poulin had handed her into the side service door padlock, because the front padlock had been rusted shut for 14 years, and Mr. Poulin had so noted on the paper. She turned the key. The door opened. The cold, dry air of Halliburton's music came out to meet her in the iron-blue Maine afternoon light, and it smelled, very faintly, of cedar and old felt and rosin and the long-vanished green tea Thomas Halliburton had brewed in his small back-room hot plate every afternoon from 1962 to 2010. She did not, for the first 5 minutes, move past the doorway. She stood with one gloved hand on the brass knob and the other in the pocket of the corduroy coat, and she let her eyes adjust to the dim. The shop was longer than she remembered. The pressed tin ceiling, painted soft cream in 1962, was discolored in the southwest corner, where a small, slow roof leak had been patched in 2003 and had not opened since. The narrow oak floorboards, laid in 1937 when the building had been a 5 and dime, were still sound. The empty, long teak display counter at the front of the shop, where Thomas Halliburton had stood from 1962 through 2010, with his good ear cocked toward the bell over the front door, stood under the boarded front window in its same place. The 2 empty rows of cedar shelving along the side walls, where the sheet music had been arranged alphabetically by composer for 48 years, were intact and empty. And at the back of the shop, against the rear wall, under a faded gray canvas tarp, that had been there since the day Halliburton's nephew had closed up in 2010, was a shape that Kate did not have to lift the tarp to recognize, because she had been standing 20 feet from the back of that particular shape for 96 Saturday mornings of her son's childhood, and she would have recognized the silhouette in the dark. She walked slowly down the length of the shop toward the tarp. She did not yet lift the tarp. She walked at first, past it, all the way to the back wall, and she put her gloved palm flat against the cold plaster behind the Steinway, because there was a small framed photograph that had hung on that piece of plaster from 1962 to 2010, a black and white photograph of Thomas Halliburton at 24 in 1962, standing next to his own first piano teacher at the back of this same shop on opening day, and the rectangle of less faded plaster where the photograph had hung was still visible. She touched the rectangle. Then she turned. She walked the 4 steps back to the tarp. She put both her gloved hands at the top edge of the canvas. She lifted the tarp slowly and folded it back along the top of the Steinway upright and laid it gently across the music desk. The 1923 Steinway model, 45 upright, stood as it had stood since 1962. The case was dark mahogany with a faint patina of dust. The lid above the keyboard was closed. The brass nameplate, Steinway and Sons, at the center of the lid was tarnished but legible. The 1923 serial number was stamped in the cast-iron plate above the strings, visible only when the lid was open. The original hinged piano bench stood in front of the upright, the cushion gone flat, the cedar legs sound. Kate set her gloved hands on the closed keyboard lid. She lifted the lid. The keys were the original 1923 ivory and ebony. A few of the ivories were chipped at the corners. The C 3 octaves below middle C had a small dark crescent at the top edge, where a child had bitten the key in 1971. Joe had bitten that same key in 2002 at the age of 10, in the same exact place. He had told her the bite mark made the key sing better. She sat down on the bench. She took off her gloves. She set the gloves on the music desk. She put her right index finger on the middle C key. She did not press the key. She held her finger there for almost a minute, the way an old woman holds her finger on the cheek of a sleeping infant, because she was not sure whether the piano had been tuned in the 16 years since it had last been played by anyone other than her son, and she was not sure whether the first note out of it was going to be a sound she could survive. She pressed the middle C key. The note came out. The note was a little flat. The note was the same long, warm, round, oak and cedar middle C that the piano had been pushing into the air of that back room since 1923. The piano had been pushed by Joe through every chord progression of his conservatory audition program in February 2009. The piano had been tuned by Halliburton's old technician in October 2007 and by Joe himself, with the help of an inexpensive electronic tuner, 6 times between 2018 and 2024 on Sunday afternoons when he had come up from Boston. Kate lifted her finger. The note died slowly. The room held very still. The note died into the cold, dry air of the shop, the way a candle dies when a window opens. She did not, then, play another note. She closed the keyboard lid. She rose from the bench. She walked back to the front of the shop. She let herself out through the side service door. She locked the padlock. She drove the 3/4 of a mile back to 14 Oak Hill Road. She lay down on the davenport in the living room with the empty rectangle of unfaded carpet in front of her, and she slept, for the first time since the morning of February 4th, 2024, for 4 uninterrupted hours. She spent the next 13 days inside the shop. She went in at 7 every morning with her own thermos of coffee and Mary Cobb's free brown bread roll. She left at 5 each evening. She did not yet take any phone calls about the building. She did not yet tell anyone in Pine Grove she had won the bid, except for Pastor Avery McGuire, who had a quiet way of finding things out without ever asking, and who had simply come to the side service door at 4 on the second Thursday afternoon with a small thermos of bone broth and a folded, clean cotton bedsheet for a dust drop cloth, and had set both on the front step and walked back to the church without ringing. She washed the windows. She swept the floor. She wiped down the long teak display counter. She rolled the canvas tarp off the Steinway and laid the tarp on the front step for the next morning's trash pickup. She wiped down the case of the piano with a soft chamois and a small amount of mineral oil. She did not yet, in those 13 days, sit down at the keys. On the morning of the 14th day, which was Tuesday, March the 24th, 2026, she came back to the piano. She brought, this time, the small, soft brown leather portfolio of cleaning rags she had been carrying back and forth from Oak Hill Road for 2 weeks. She sat down on the piano bench. She intended to clean, finally, the inside of the bench storage compartment because she had been told by her own piano teacher, Mrs. Margaret Halliburton, in 1962, that an upright piano bench was the place where every piano teacher in the world stored exactly one untold secret. And she had been told the same again by Thomas Halliburton in 1972, and she had told it to 43 years of her own living room beginners in turn. And she could not, even now, sit down at the Steinway without intending eventually to clean the inside of the bench. She lifted the hinged seat. Inside the bench storage compartment, packed in a loose, dusty stack about a foot deep, were the yellowed beginner piano method books Thomas Halliburton had bought for his in-store lessons and never sold off. Bastion Piano Basics, Levels 1 through 4. The Faber Adult Piano Adventures. The John W. Schaum Red Book. The Alfred's Group Piano Course. Kate began to lift the books out, one slow handful at a time, and to set them on the dusty floor beside the bench in a small, careful tower. She turned each book over as she lifted it because she had been told by Mrs. Margaret Halliburton in 1962 that you turned over every method book a child had used because the child's name was always penciled inside the front cover. The first book at the top of the stack was a Bastion Level 2 with the penciled name Margaret McGuire, 1986 on the inside flap. Margaret McGuire had become Pastor Avery McGuire's late wife and had died of cancer in 2009. Kate closed the book very gently. The next book was a Faber Adult Piano Adventures with the penciled name Harold Bewdrey, 1994 on the inside flap. Harold Beaudry was the man who plowed the Methodist church lot every winter. The next was an Alfred's Group piano with Hallie Cobb, 2002. The next was a Schaum Red Book with Joseph Brennan, 1998, in her own son's small, careful 7-year-old hand, with the small smiley face he had drawn under his own name on the inside flap, because Thomas Halliburton had told him every great pianist was required, by law, to draw a small smiley face under his own name on his first method book. Kate set the Schaum Red Book down very carefully on the top of the small careful tower beside the bench. She did not, for a moment, lift another book. She put both her hands flat on her thighs. She breathed. Then she went back to the bench. She lifted out the next 3 books, and the next 4, and the next 6. The stack on the dusty floor grew to a foot high. The bench compartment grew shallower. At the bottom of the bench, at the back left corner, under the last single-yellowed Schirmer book of Hannen exercises, was a small folded square of soft white linen. Kate lifted the white linen out. The linen was the kind of fine plain Irish linen her own mother had embroidered tea towels on in 1965. The linen was folded tightly around something rectangular and flat, about the size of a hardcover book. The linen was tied with a single piece of cream cotton kitchen twine that Kate recognized, in the lantern light of the dim shop interior, with a small dry shock low in her stomach, because the knot of the kitchen twine was the same flat slip knot her son had used to tie up every cardboard box he had ever packed his belongings into for any move of his life, beginning with the moving day trip to Boston for his New England Conservatory dorm in August 2009, because she had taught him the knot at the age of 11, because David's mother had taught her the knot at the age of 19. She set the linen-wrapped rectangle on her lap. She untied the cream cotton kitchen twine. She unfolded the linen. Inside the linen was a slim, soft brown leather portfolio. The leather, softened to the color of old whiskey, buckled shut with a single tarnished brass clasp. The portfolio was the same portfolio Joe had carried his sheet music to his New England Conservatory auditions in February 2009. The portfolio was the same portfolio Kate had given him as a Christmas present in December 2008 when he was 17, with his initials J.B. embossed in small gold lettering at the bottom right corner of the cover. She undid the brass clasp. She opened the portfolio. Inside the portfolio was a stack of cream Schirmer 12-stave manuscript paper, 42 pages, written in careful black ink notation in the slanted hand she had taught her son to write in at the age of 8. The top page was the title page. The title page read, in the same careful black ink hand, in centered block letter capitals, Sonata No. 1 in F major for my mother who taught me every note. J. Brennan, 20. 23 to 2024. Kate sat very still on the bench with the title page in front of her. She read the title page once. She read the title page again. She set the title page down on her lap. She turned to the second page. The second page was the first page of the first movement, marked Andante cantabile in his small, careful Italian, in F major, 4/4 time, with the opening measure of the right-hand line a slow, ascending figure that she recognized at the second beat as a paraphrase of the slow movement of Schubert's B-flat major sonata, which had been her own audition piece for Bangor Conservatory in 1975, and which she had played for her son every Sunday afternoon of his childhood, on the Story and Clark upright that she had sold in June 2025, until he had memorized the slow movement at the age of 9. She turned past the first page of the first movement. She turned past the second. She turned past the third. By the bottom of the third page of the first movement she had begun very quietly to cry, in the old way of crying that produced tears which had not been available to her since the early weeks of 2024, and which had now, on the dusty floor of the back of 18 Pine Grove Main Street on a Tuesday morning in March 2026, come back. She turned to the fourth page. The fourth page was the second movement opening, marked Adagio molto in D minor, in a slow, eighth-note cantilena, in the right hand over a deep, open fifth ostinato in the left. The opening 4 bars of the Adagio were the first 4 bars of the lullaby she had sung to him at the age of 3 months, in the rocking chair in the upstairs nursery at 14 Oak Hill Road during the long sleepless winter of 1991. The lullaby was Sweet and Low by Tennyson and Barnby. She had not sung the lullaby in 34 years. She had not remembered the melody at all. She had not been able to remember the melody when she had tried, at his graveside in St. Anne's in Pine Grove in February 2024, to remember it. The melody, which she had not remembered, was the opening of her son's Adagio movement. She did not, after that, turn another page. She set the manuscript down very carefully on the bench beside her. She put both her hands over her face. She sat on the bench inside the empty shop, with the open Steinway upright behind her and the small framed photograph of her son at 7 still pressed against her breastbone inside the interior pocket of the corduroy coat, and she wept, in the old way that produced tears, in the way she had not been able to weep for 2 years and 2 months and 1 week, for 45 minutes, in the patient, absolute silence of the back room of Halliburton's music. When she could breathe again, she wiped her face on the inside of her sleeve. She did not yet stand. She put the manuscript back in the portfolio. Beneath the manuscript, in the bottom of the portfolio, were 2 more items she had not yet seen. The first was a folded 2-page handwritten letter on yellow legal pad paper. The letter was dated at the top, January 14, 2024. The salutation was the single word, Mom. The handwriting was Joe's. She unfolded the letter. She held the letter up to the warm afternoon light coming through the front window. She read, Mom, I am finishing this for you. It is going to be your 70th birthday present in November of 2027. I am working ahead because the second movement has been giving me trouble, and I want a full year of revisions before I show it to anybody. I am writing this letter in case I get hit by a bus on Storrow Drive, which Marcy keeps reminding me is a real possibility. If you are reading this letter, it means you found the bench. And it means I did not in fact deliver the sonata in person, and I am sorry. The second movement is the only thing I have ever written that I am proud of. The fingering is humane. The dynamics are mine. The middle section in B-flat is on purpose and is allowed to be sentimental because I am 26 pages into this and I get to decide. The whole thing should run about 38 minutes at the indicated tempi. If I have not been the one to play it for you, please do not let your sister Patty find some chiropractor from Portland to do it. Please drive into Bangor and find a young pianist named Hannah Chen at the conservatory. She is finishing her DMA in performance. She plays my idiom honestly, and she is the only pianist I know who can read my second movement without flinching at the rubato. Tell her I asked. She will say yes. She owes me a favor from a recital we did in Cambridge in 2019, and she has been waiting for the chance to pay it back. I love you, Mom. I love you the way I have loved you for 32 years, which is the way you taught me to love piano music, which is to say slowly and on purpose, and without ever once turning the page early. Your Joe. Kate folded the letter back along its single fold. She lowered the letter to the manuscript. Below the letter, at the very bottom of the portfolio, was a small, black velvet jeweler's pouch. She knew the pouch. She had bought the pouch in March 2013 from a jeweler in Boston the week before Joe's New England Conservatory graduation. She had put inside the pouch the small 1957 sterling silver treble clef lapel pin her own piano teacher, Mrs. Margaret Halliburton, the late wife of Thomas Halliburton's older cousin Walter, had given her at her own Bangor Conservatory graduation in 1979, and she had given the pin to Joe at his conservatory graduation in May 2013. Joe had worn the pin on the lapel of every concert jacket he had owned for 11 years. Joe had been wearing the pin on his lapel the morning of February 4, 2024. Marcy had handed the pin back to Kate after the funeral, in the doorway of the kitchen at 14 Oak Hill Road on a Tuesday afternoon in late February 2024. And Kate, who had not been entirely sober that afternoon in the sense that her grief had taken her out of the room for the better part of an hour, and she could not remember most of the conversation, had put the pin somewhere safe. She had spent most of the next 18 months looking, in small private spasms, for the pin. She had not found it. She had assumed she had given it away to Halliburton's nephew on the afternoon 2 weeks after the funeral, when she had given Halliburton's nephew the entire bench bag of Joe's Pine Grove sheet music in a soft canvas tote, because she could not look at the sheet music in the linen closet upstairs at 14 Oak Hill Road anymore. She had spent the next 2 years quietly assuming the pin was gone forever. The pin was inside the pouch. Halliburton's nephew, 3 years sober now and in Kate's same Tuesday night chapter at the church basement, had returned the entire bench bag of Joe's sheet music to the Steinway bench in March 2024, because he had not known what else to do with it. The bench bag had contained the bench bag's own small black velvet jeweler's pouch. The pouch had contained the pin. Kate lifted the pin out of the pouch with the thumb and forefinger of her right hand. She held the pin up to the warm afternoon light coming through the front window. The 1957 sterling silver treble clef caught the light the way it had caught the light on the lapel of her own conservatory dress in June 1979, the way it had caught the light on the lapel of her son's black wool concert jacket in May 2013. She pinned it carefully to the lapel of her cinnamon brown corduroy duster coat over the left side of her chest, on the side closest to her heart, because that was where Mrs. Margaret Halliburton had pinned it to her own dress on the morning of June 4th, 1979. She closed the portfolio. She closed the bench. She stood. She walked out of the shop. She drove home. She did not stop at the post office or the bakery on the way. She let herself into the kitchen at 14 Oak Hill Road. She set the closed portfolio on the small pine kitchen table. She sat down at the table. She picked up the small landline telephone David had installed in 1989. She dialed her daughter-in-law's number in Burlington, Vermont. Marcy answered on the first ring. "Kate," Marcy said, in the careful, watchful, very young voice Kate had been hearing on the other end of the phone for 2 years. "Kate, is something wrong?" Kate said. "No, Marcy." "Marcy, can you and Lily come up?" Marcy was quiet for a moment. Marcy said, "Kate? When?" Kate said, "Now." "Marcy? Now would be good." Marcy said, "We can drive up tonight. Lily has preschool tomorrow. I'll call out. We can leave in an hour." Kate said, "Drive carefully, Marcy. Bring the booster seat. There's a snow advisory after midnight east of St. Johnsbury." Marcy said, "Yes, Kate, we'll see you in 5 hours." They came at 9:15 that night. The headlights of the small blue Volkswagen Tiguan swept across the kitchen window. Kate was already standing at the front door with the porch light on. Marcy carried the sleeping Lily, aged 3 and 7 months, against her shoulder in a small red wool coat. The little girl's small fingers were curled into a fist around the top of Marcy's coat collar. Kate took her granddaughter into her own arms in the doorway. She held the child against her own chest. The child did not wake. The child smelled very faintly of the cinnamon oatmeal Marcy fed her in Burlington every evening and of the green wool blanket from the back seat. Kate stood in the doorway with the child in her arms and her son's silver treble-clef pin on the lapel of her own corduroy coat, and she stood there for a long minute, and Marcy stood beside her, and neither woman said anything, because there was nothing yet to say. In the morning, after Kate fed Lily a bowl of farina with maple syrup at the small pine kitchen table, and Marcy drank her own black coffee in a hand-thrown ceramic mug Patty had once made in a pottery class in Portland in 1995, Kate said, "Marcy, I would like to show you something. I would like to show you both something." Marcy said, "At the shop." Kate said, "At the shop." Marcy said, "Kate, I knew." Kate said, "You knew." Marcy said, "Joe told me he was writing you a sonata about a month before he died. He told me it was 3/4 done. He told me he had hidden the manuscript somewhere safe, and he was not going to tell me where until June, because he did not trust me not to peek. I have spent 2 years wondering where it was. I have not gone looking. I thought he might have left it in a friend's apartment in Cambridge. I thought it might be lost. I am so glad, Kate, I am so glad you found it." They drove the 3/4 of a mile to 18 Pine Grove Main Street together in the Toyota Corolla, Marcy in the passenger seat with Lily and her booster in the back, on a clear blue April-coming morning in late March 2026, and Kate let them in through the side service door. The three of them sat on a folded blue wool blanket on the dusty pine floor of the empty shop beside the open Steinway upright, with the open portfolio between them, and Kate read the title page out loud, and Marcy cried with one hand over her mouth, and Lily, who at 3 years and 7 months knew the word piano and not many other words, said, in a small clear voice, "Grandma, sing." Kate sat at the Steinway. Marcy lifted Lily up to sit on the bench beside her grandmother. Kate played, very slowly, with one finger of her right hand on the middle line, the 8 bars of Sweet and Low she had failed to remember at the graveside in 2024, which Joe had given back to her in the second movement of his own sonata. Lily watched her grandmother's finger move across the white keys with the absolute concentration of a child of 3 years and 7 months. When Kate lifted her finger from the last note, Lily clapped once, twice, the small open clap of a small child whose mother had clapped after every song since the year she was born. And Kate Brennan, with the pin of her own dead piano teacher on her own lapel, and her own dead son's writing in the open portfolio at her feet, and her own only granddaughter on the bench beside her, smiled the first slow smile she had smiled in 2 years and 2 months and 1 week. Kate Brennan did 3 things in the 8 months between that morning and the second Thursday in November of 2026. The first thing she did was telephone Hannah Chen. Joe's letter had given her one number, written in Joe's careful left-handed pencil between the second and third paragraphs, with a Maine area code and a 207 prefix in the words, Bangor Conservatory Office. Leave message after the tone. Kate sat at her kitchen table in the small 2-bedroom yellow clapboard house on Birch Lane on a Wednesday morning in early April 2026, with the cordless telephone in her right hand and Joe's letter open on the wood grain laminate beside her left hand, and the silver treble clef pin on the lapel of the same cinnamon corduroy duster she had worn into the courthouse on March 11th. She dialed the 10 digits, and she let the line ring 4 times, and she got a recorded voice that said, "You have reached the office of the keyboard department at the Hartman School of Music at the Bangor Conservatory. Please leave a message," Kate said, in the steady, level voice of a woman who had taught the same scale to 9,000 children. "This is Catherine Brennan from Pine Grove. I am the mother of Joseph Brennan. I am looking for Hannah Chen. My son left her a piece of writing. I would like to bring it to her. My number is 207-649-3811. Thank you." She hung up the cordless, and she sat at the kitchen table, and she finished the cold half-cup of black coffee in front of her, and she did not cry, because she had cried at the bench in the music shop on the afternoon she had read the letter, and she did not need to cry again on a Wednesday morning at the kitchen table in April. Hannah Chen called back on Thursday evening at 6:15. Kate was standing at the kitchen counter, washing a single white plate and a single fork and a single coffee mug in warm water with a yellow sponge. The cordless rang on the wall above the toaster, and Kate dried her hands on the dish towel folded over the oven handle, and she answered the phone. The voice on the other end was a young woman's voice, not high, careful, slightly accented in the way of a person who had grown up speaking 2 languages in the same kitchen. "Mrs. Brennan," the voice said. "This is Hannah Chen." I was. Your son was my teacher. I have not heard his name spoken in almost 2 years. I would very much like to come and see what you have." "May I come on Saturday?" Kate said. "Hannah." "Yes. Come on Saturday. The shop is at 18 Main Street in Pine Grove. There is a side service door on the alley because the front door still has the auction notice on it from March. Knock there. I will be inside cleaning the pedal mechanism on the Steinway." Hannah said, "Mrs. Brennan, was it the Steinway, was it the upright?" Kate said, "It was the upright. He had been playing it every Sunday for 11 months before he died." The line was quiet for 4 seconds, and then Hannah said, in a voice that was not quite steady, "Mrs. Brennan, he told me the story of that piano in our second lesson. He told me the man who had owned it had been his mother's first piano teacher in 1963 and had given the lapel pin to his mother. He told me his mother thought the pin was lost. Did you find a pin in the bench, Mrs. Brennan?" Kate, with one hand on the kitchen counter and one hand on the cordless, said, "Yes. I found the pin in the bench." Hannah said, very quietly, "I will see you on Saturday." Hannah Chen arrived in a battered burgundy 1996 Honda Civic at 11:10 on Saturday morning, April the 18th, in a gray spring rain that had been falling steadily since dawn. Kate watched her park at the curb in front of the boarded storefront through the front window of the shop. She was a small young woman of 23, 5 feet 2 inches, in a long black wool coat and a slate gray wool scarf wound twice around her throat, and a pair of round wire-rimmed glasses fogged from the rain, and she carried, against her chest, a black hard-shell music portfolio of the kind used by conservatory students to carry single manuscripts. She came around the side of the building, and Kate let her in through the alley service door and led her down the dim hallway into the main shop. The tarp was off the Steinway. The bench was unlatched. The portfolio with Joe's manuscript lay open on the closed lid of the upright. Hannah stood in the middle of the bare pine floor, and she looked at the piano, and she looked at the manuscript, and she looked at the older woman with the silver pin on the lapel of the corduroy coat, and then, without speaking, she walked to the upright and she sat down at the bench, and she set her own black portfolio on the floor beside her, and she lifted the first page of Joe's manuscript with both hands, the way a person handles a thing that is more fragile than paper, and she read it for 2 full minutes without making a sound. When she set the page down, she said in the same careful young voice that had spoken on the telephone, "Mrs. Brennan." He was a better teacher than he let himself say. "I would like to play this piece for you. I would like to learn it. May I borrow the manuscript?" Kate said. "You may borrow the manuscript. I would like to hear it played in November." Hannah said, "In November?" Kate said, "On the 12th. It would have been his 35th birthday, and it is my 70th. We would do it at the Methodist Church on the corner of Maine and Linden. We would do it at 7 in the evening. We would do it once, and the second movement is for me, but the whole piece is for him, and I would like the people of this town to hear what my son could do." Hannah said, "Mrs. Brennan, I will be ready by November 12th. Kate said, "Thank you." The two of them stood, the older and the younger, on either side of the open piano, and Hannah said before she left, "May I see the pin?" Kate, without speaking, unpinned the small silver treble clef from her own lapel, and she handed it across the bench top to Hannah Chen, who held it in her own open palm for the space of 3 breaths and then handed it back, and Kate pinned it back onto her own coat. The second thing Kate did in those 8 months was open the shop. She did not open it as a music store. She opened it as a teaching studio and a small repair bench. She painted over the cracked black Dependable Instruments sign in the front window with a clean coat of warm, cream-white latex paint, and she lettered the new name in the same warm gold lettering Mr. Halliburton had used in 1948, with a brush borrowed from Patty's old pottery class kit, and the new name read, "Brennan's Music," and beneath it, in smaller hand-lettered script, "Lessons and Repair." She had Earl Vachon the carpenter take down the gray plywood from the front windows on the second Saturday in October, and she had Howard Quint the locksmith install a new brass deadbolt on the front door, and she had Pete Halliburton, who was the nephew of the original Mr. Halliburton, and who at 38 had been 3 full years sober at the second meeting of the AA Hall above the Methodist Church, come by on a Tuesday evening in October to help her tune the Steinway upright and to teach her how to regulate the action on a baby Yamaha studio piano he had restored in his own garage from a junked instrument abandoned outside a Portland church in 2023. Pete worked in silence with a regulating screwdriver in his right hand and a chamois cloth in his left hand for almost 3 hours, and at the end of it he stood up and he wiped his hands on a white rag he kept in his back pocket, and he said, "Mrs. Brennan, your son taught me to play C major on this exact bench when I was 14 years old. I owe you more than I can ever pay. I would like to be your first hire. I would like to be the repair side. I do not need a salary. I have a pension from the railroad and a small disability check. I will keep my hours and I will keep my own tools and I will only ask that I have a key." Kate said, "Pete, you will have a key. You will also have a salary, because I am not running this place on charity and I am not letting you work for free, and we will talk about the number on Friday." He said, "Friday." She said, "Friday." He took his coat off the brass hook by the door and he went home. The third thing Kate did was order pins. She ordered 12 dozen 1-inch sterling silver treble clef lapel pins from a small jewelry shop in Bangor that had been making them by hand since 1948, the same shop where the original Mr. Halliburton had ordered the very pin she had been given in 1963 and which her son had returned to her in the bottom of the bench at 18 Main Street in March of 2026. The shop owner, a woman of 61 named Yolanda Pelletier, sent the first dozen by mail in a small white cardboard box with a thank you note in her own hand and a refusal to accept payment for that first dozen because, the note read, "My own father bought his first violin from Mr. Halliburton in 1952, and I have been waiting 40 years for someone to open that shop again." Kate paid for the rest of the pins. She kept the first dozen in a small lacquered black wooden box on the counter beside the cash register, and she put a small handwritten card beside the box that read, in her own careful schoolteacher hand, for every beginning student, on the day of the first method book. By the 1st of November of 2026, the shop was ready. The Steinway upright stood at the back wall on a clean, polished pine floor, with a fresh oak bench newly built by Earl Vachon, and the original 1923 bench with the discovery compartment kept off to the side as a small, reverent piece of furniture against the east wall, the same way a family keeps a great-grandmother's chair. 2 studio uprights stood along the south wall. A small repair workbench with a green felt cloth and a pegboard of regulating tools stood at the front of the shop near the window. 3 method books and a small stack of staff paper sat on a shelf above the workbench. Pete Halliburton had a small private bench in the corner with a brass key on a leather lanyard. Kate Brennan had a roll-top oak desk by the front window with her son's letter framed in plain pine and hanging above it, and her son's open manuscript copied at the print shop on glossy paper and bound in a maroon leather portfolio sitting on the corner of the desk, and the original 1924 manuscript locked in a fireproof safe behind the wall in the back room. The auction notice from March was no longer on the front door. The door had a small brass bell hung on the inside that rang clean and small and bright every time anyone came in or went out. On the morning of Thursday, November the 12th, 2026, which was Joe Brennan's birthday and Kate Brennan's 70th birthday, and the 878th day since Joe had died on the patch of black ice near Eddington on Route 9, Kate woke at 5:48 in the bedroom of the small yellow clapboard house on Birch Lane, in the pre-dawn dark of a Maine November, and she lay in the bed for almost 20 minutes without moving. Then she got up. She made herself a single soft-boiled egg and a single piece of toasted whole wheat bread and a single cup of black coffee in the small white kitchen, and she ate it at the small pine table, looking out the window onto a backyard already dusted with the first thin coat of November snow. She dressed in the cinnamon-brown corduroy duster coat over the oatmeal cashmere turtleneck and the dark plum wide-leg trousers and the ox-blood lace-up ankle boots. She pinned the silver treble clef to her lapel. She drove the Toyota Corolla the 3/4 of a mile to the church. The Pine Grove Methodist Church on the corner of Main Street and Linden Avenue is a small white clapboard New England Methodist church built in 1854 with a single steeple of black-painted wood and a single bronze bell from a foundry in Pittsburgh. The sanctuary has 22 oak pews on each side, and a center aisle and a small raised platform at the front with a hand-pumped organ on the right and a 1908 Steinway Model O grand piano on the left. The piano Joe Brennan had practiced on every Wednesday afternoon after school from the age of 9 to the age of 17. The piano on which Kate herself had taught Sunday school children a simple line of joy to the world every Christmas Eve for 34 consecutive years. The piano had been freshly tuned that Tuesday by Pete Halliburton. People began to come at 6:40. They came on foot down Linden Avenue in their dark wool coats with their boots crunching on the new dry snow. They came in Toyotas and Subarus and one Ford pickup. Reverend Donna Faircloth, 58, who had buried Joe at the cemetery north of town in February of 2024, and who had buried David Brennan in February of 2018 and who had counseled Kate Brennan through both of those buryings and through the 17 years before that of her sobriety, stood in the open doorway of the church in her plain black wool clergy coat, and she shook each hand that came through. By 7 o'clock, the sanctuary held 181 people, which was approximately 1/3 of the population of the town of Pine Grove, Maine. Kate sat in the front pew on the left side with Patty Fahey beside her in a deep, emerald green wool coat, and Marcy Lindgren Brennan beside Patty, and Marcy held the small sleeping form of Lily Joan Brennan, age 4 years and 4 months, against her shoulder. 3 pews behind them, on the right-hand aisle, sat Pete Halliburton in a clean black suit, his hands folded on his lap, and the small brass 36-month sober chip from the A.A. Hall above the Methodist Church visible in the breast pocket of his coat. 2 pews behind him sat Ansel Poulain, the courthouse clerk, and his wife, Eileen. Earl Vachon and Howard Quint sat together in the back. Beneath the side window on the west wall sat the 3 Russell boys, now men of 21 and 23 and 25, who had been Joe's last 3 students from the year 2015 to the year 2017, and who had driven up that afternoon from Boston and Providence and Hartford in 3 separate cars. The Bangor Daily News had sent one reporter, a quiet woman of 40 named Jeanine Loring, who sat unobtrusively in the very last pew with a small notebook open on her knee. Yolanda Pelletier from the jewelry shop in Bangor sat with her husband near the back, and the small silver treble-clef pin on her own lapel caught the candlelight from the side aisle. At 7 o'clock, Reverend Donna Faircloth stood at the front of the sanctuary, and she said only this. She said, "Tonight, we are going to listen to a piece of music written by Joseph Brennan, who was the son of Catherine Brennan and the husband of Marcy Brennan and the father of Lily Brennan, and who was a piano teacher of this town, and who died on the 4th of February in the year 2024. The piece is called Sonata No. 1 in F major. It was written between October of 2023 and January of 2024. It is dedicated to his mother. It will be played in its entirety and for the only time by Miss Hannah Chen of the Bangor Conservatory, who studied with Joseph in 2023. The piece is in 3 movements and will take approximately 27 minutes. I would ask that there be no applause between movements. There will be no announcements after. The piece will end. We will sit. We will leave. Thank you for being here." Hannah Chen, in a long, simple black wool concert dress with a small white pearl pin at the throat, walked out from the side door beside the platform. She was 23 years old, and she carried herself the way a person carries herself when she has practiced 8 months on one piece of music written by a dead man for his living mother. She bowed once, very briefly, to the room, and then she bowed once, longer, and only to Kate Brennan, and then she sat at the 1908 Steinway Grand on the left side of the platform. She set the manuscript on the music rack. She took her glasses off, and she set them on the corner of the piano top. She placed her hands on the keys, and she let 3 seconds of silence pass through the sanctuary, and then she began. The first movement, in F major, Allegro moderato, ran 12 minutes and 40 seconds. It was a fast, conversational, slightly Schubertian opening, with a long, lyric second theme in the relative minor that wandered through 3 different key centers before coming back to F. It sounded like a young man walking down a country road in October with a sketchbook in his coat pocket and his head full of half-finished ideas. The second movement, Andante in B-flat major, ran 9 minutes and 18 seconds. It opened with 8 bars of the lullaby, Sweet and Low, played plain, in the right hand alone, exactly the way a mother sings to a baby. The lullaby then opened up into a set of 7 variations, the last of which returned to the simple 8 bars, but with the bass line of a Bach chorale beneath it, the way Joe had once written into a Christmas card for his mother in 2017. Kate sat in the front pew with one hand wrapped around Patty's hand, and she did not move, and she did not weep. The third movement, Allegro vivace, 4 minutes and 52 seconds, was a brief, joyous F major rondo built on a child's nursery rhyme figure with the simple opening of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star woven into the inner voices, and it ended on a clean, bright F major chord held for the length of one long bow. Hannah Chen lifted her hands. She set them in her lap. She bowed her head over the keyboard for the space of one breath. She stood. She bowed to the audience. She bowed. Again, longer, only to Kate Brennan, and she walked off the platform through the side door, and the sanctuary of 181 people sat in absolute silence for 19 seconds before anyone moved. Reverend Donna Faircloth stood. The room rose with her. The room left. Kate stood last, with Lily now awake in her own arms. The little girl, who at 4 years and 4 months had been awake for the entire second movement, said quietly into her grandmother's ear, in a small, private voice, "Grandma." That was sweet and low. And Kate, in the front pew of the small white New England church, with the silver treble-clef pin warm against the wool of her coat, kissed the top of her granddaughter's head and said, yes, that was sweet and low. Brennan's music, lessons and repair opened the doors of 18 Main Street to the public for the first time at 9 o'clock on the morning of Thursday, November the 19th, 2026, exactly 1 week after the premiere. The new front windows were clear of plywood. The cream and gold lettering on the glass read, Brennan's Music, Lessons and Repair, EST, 2026, and beneath that, in smaller hand letters, Halliburton Building, 1948. The brass bell on the inside of the door rang at 6 minutes past 9 when the first customer came in. The first customer was a 31-year-old woman named Helen Rock, who had moved up from Portland 3 weeks before with her 2 children, and the older child, a girl of 7 named June, wore a yellow rain slicker and held her mother's left hand and looked. The entire time her mother was speaking to the silver-haired woman behind the front counter at the upright Steinway against the back wall. Kate Brennan took the small lacquered black box from the shelf behind the counter. She opened it. She removed one 1-inch sterling silver treble-clef lapel pin. She walked around the counter. She knelt, slowly, on the polished pine floor of her own shop in front of the 7-year-old girl in the yellow rain slicker. She said, in the same plain, steady piano teacher voice she had used with 9,000 children before this one, June. My name is Mrs. Brennan. I am going to be your teacher. This pin was given to me by my first teacher on the day I opened my own first method book. It was given back to me 2 years ago by my son, who was also a teacher. I would like to give it to you now. May I pin it to your coat? The little girl in the yellow rain slicker nodded once, very slowly. Kate pinned the small silver treble clef to the front left collar of the yellow slicker. She stood. She said, Helen. Bring her on Thursdays at 4. Helen Rock, with one hand over her mouth, nodded, and the two of them, mother and daughter, walked out the door of the shop, and the brass bell rang, and Kate Brennan stood in the middle of the bright, clean, pine-floored music shop that had been her father's old grocery and Mr. Halliburton's music store and her son's secret Sunday afternoon studio, and she looked, for one quiet long moment, at the 1923 Steinway upright at the back wall and at the original 1924 bench on its own small, reverent place against the east wall, and at the framed letter in her son's handwriting on the wall above the roll-top desk, and at the empty space on the front counter where the small lacquered black box of pins now held only 11 instead of 12, and Catherine Margaret Brennan, née Fahey, 68 years old that morning, of Pine Grove, Maine, said out loud, to the empty shop, and to her son, and to her father, and to her dead husband, and to herself, we are open.